This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Pretty interesting slate of games coming up in week number 11. I hope that Thursday night was not a harbinger of things to come, because that was not as fun as expected, but still some pretty good stuff on the docket for the rest of this week. We're going to talk some player props across week 11 by bringing on JJ Zachariason, picking his brain on this weekend slate and getting you ready for week number 11. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as I am every Friday by JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Find his work at LateRound.com and the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. And JJ, typically we begin by talking about Thursday night. And honestly, can we pretend it didn't happen? Is that okay?
It's pretty depressing, man. Pretty depressing. You got Mark Andrews now out for the season. Joe Burrow, we still don't know what's going on with him at the time of this recording, but doesn't sound super great. I've seen some reports that maybe it could just be like a 1 to 2 week kind of heel thing and then just a pain tolerance issue, but there's also surgery on the table. And, you know, after last night's game, you got to look at Cincinnati too and say, is this the team that they're really going to risk Joe Burrow's future? I don't know anything about the injury, but you know, you have to start questioning those types of things in a really tight AFC playoff race with a lot of good teams. You know, is this what's going to happen? And really, now you're looking at the Steelers, and all of a sudden they get Dorian Thompson-Robinson this weekend, and then they might get a Joe Burrow-less Bengals.
So they'd be 8-3 potentially?
Potential. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, that's bananas. And like it sucks because like we talk so much about how fun the AFC is, and suddenly we might have a playoff with no Josh Allen, which is a bummer because I like watching Josh Allen. Might have a playoff with no Joe Burrow potentially, and that's not to speak ill of the other guys. Like I like watching Tua and stuff like that, but it would be a bummer to miss out on two of the more fun quarterbacks in the league. And I was kind of like, you know, you look at the standings, you're like, oh, there might be a shot that either the Bengals or Bills miss the playoffs, but now it's like they might both miss given how tough the Bills schedule is. So I don't know. I'm just bummed. I need Lamar to stay healthy. A little bit of scare there last night too. Like, you know, it's just, I need these fun quarterbacks. We can't lose all of them before the playoffs get here.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't done the research on it, but it at least feels like subjectively that we've just seen more quarterback injuries than ever this year. Like it just feels that way. Like we're just seeing complete, just disastrous situations happening for these franchises.
Well, I have a super flex league where I thought I was destroyed because I only had two starters to begin, and those were Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson. And I was like, oh man, like I lost Richardson. This team's pretty good, but it's like, you know, new viable quarterbacks keep popping up, and it's like, okay, you got Will Levis now, you know, you got some other guys, you got DTR in case he pops up. So it's like, it's weird the attrition rate at quarterback this year. It's been pretty tough, but we're going to talk about some fun things for week 11. We're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, their shifting philosophy, how to handle stuff like that when teams are making a pretty conscious switch to play football a bit differently. We'll talk about player props JJ likes for week 11 as well. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Tomorrow morning, Tom Vecchio will break down Sunday Night Football between the Vikings and the Broncos. That'll be up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed Saturday morning. It'll also be up on FanDuel TV Plus. To get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account, or download the FanDuel TV Plus app on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku as well. Let's begin things, JJ, by talking about those Dallas Cowboys, because over the past 3 weeks, since their bye week, they've leaned fully into the pass, and it's been a very different team than what they were earlier on. And that obviously matters a lot when it comes to trying to project expectations for teams like this. How quickly do you want to react to shifts in philosophy like that when it seems like the team is doing it pretty consciously?
Yeah, and it's not just that they're doing it consciously, it's that they're effective in doing it, right? That's one of the big things. And I talked about this a little bit with like the Falcons on my podcast and the Bijan Robinson usage. And we saw that switch last week with Robinson. Obviously they have a bye this week, but that we saw that switch last week because when teams are losing and things aren't working, they're going to try to shift things and change things to make sure something does work. And if you look at Dallas, things weren't really working that well. And they've been a lot better over the last few weeks, airing it out a little bit more. The one thing I will say, though, is that a lot of the drop back over expected numbers and such. They're not matchup specific per se, right? They're more so, this is what we typically see in these scenarios, and this is how pass heavy this team is in this given scenario. And if you look at their 3 games that they've played over the last 3 weeks where this change has occurred, last week it was fairly neutral depending on the source you're looking at for drop back over expected. It wasn't like as insane. The week before that was Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is a pass funnel, right? Philadelphia is a team where you absolutely should be passing it. They're one of the best teams, if not the best team against the run. And they've been oddly one of the worst teams against the pass when last year just wasn't that way at all. I mean, the secondary is fine, but so like that's been an issue for Philly, and teams are attacking them in that way. And even the Rams to some degree, I mean, to some degree, we see, a little bit more of that funnel. It's not, it's definitely not like as extreme as the Eagles, but I do think that, we should at least take it with a grain of salt to some degree here with Dallas. But with that being said, it's working. They're doing well. This is going to be really interesting this weekend with Carolina, because teams have, Carolina's been a little bit better against the run of late, but teams have attacked them on the ground a little bit more. So I think that's going to be pretty telling. But I do think that even in a small sample, we're working on small samples to begin with in football. And so I do think you have to be reactive when you're projecting and say, yeah, this Dallas team probably be more pass heavy than they were back in like week 2, week 3.
Yeah, you were talking about the Eagles. I believe they faced the highest rate of passes on early downs this year. Yeah, they're at 68% pass rate on first downs against them. Carolina has faced a 43.9% pass rate, which is the lowest in football. So they've gone from one extreme to the other. Like, they're still going to probably be pass heavy, but will they be as pass heavy? I probably wouldn't expect that personally in the future. Let's talk about some fluid situations entering this week. JJ, when you're looking across the league, which situations that are in flux right now are you monitoring for when props are posted there?
Yeah, one is definitely the Minnesota backfield. Now, right now, Alexander Mattison has not been officially ruled out. He had a limited practice yesterday on Thursday. We're recording this on Friday. And so, a lot of times, though, we've seen that occur with players who are concussed, where they got some of these limited practices in, but they didn't clear concussion protocol in time for that game on Sunday. And so I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. And so if that doesn't happen, just be ready that I think Ty Chandler is going to see the majority of the backfield work. Last week after Alexander Mattison was concussed, and you and I had talked about this, Jim, and you sent over some data about how Ty Chandler versus Kene Nwanwu. Yep. Right. I think that's the correct pronunciation.
I dug through 250 pages of the Vikings media guidebook to find that.
Yeah.
It was Iowa State had the wrong one. I think it was awful.
You and I are like the only people who care this deeply about pronouncing these names right. But I at least, I mean, I guess you probably went your entire life with people saying your last name wrong to some degree. Absolutely. And mine, people definitely did that with mine. So I have to give a little love to these guys. But last week without Alexander Mattison, Chandler outsnapped Nwanwu 13-3 after that injury. I expect Chandler, from like a projection standpoint, if Madison's out, probably see like 70% of the backfield work. Now, he's not like this bell cow type back. He wasn't even that necessarily throughout college. He's more of this like one of his top comps for me with my prospect model was Elijah Mitchell. And so I think that's sort of what we're looking at here, where Mitchell was great in the right scheme, but we know that, he hasn't been able to stay as healthy, and that might have to do with just size and the way they use him and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not necessarily expecting Ty Chandler to see 90% of the team's backfield work. I do think that Nwanwu could be involved in some way. I don't know if Myles Gaskin's going to be active. I know that they just got him off or ended up getting him back. And so maybe something will happen there, but I do think Ty Chandler will still be, sort of the biggest beneficiary of this Alexander Mattison concussion. Another situation to monitor, the Houston wide receivers. This is really, it's so strange, but we haven't seen their big 4 wide receivers. So that's Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Noah Brown, Robert Woods. We haven't seen them all healthy in a given week since week 1. And in week 1, it was before we knew what Tank Dell was about, right? Like we saw him in the preseason. We were optimistic that he could be good, but they weren't using him, in the role that they're using him in now. And so, entering this week, if all of them are hypothetically healthy, how is this going to play out? Now, I will say Noah Brown is now hurt as well. So we could just see a very easy to project situation where you got Nico Collins and Tank Dell playing on the perimeter, playing 2 wide sets. Robert Woods plays the slot. I think that if Noah Brown plays, what we might see, and this is more just from a, football and projection standpoint and how I'm sort of looking at the situation, I think we might see Dell and Nico play the most of the four and then see a little bit more of a rotation out of the slot with Noah Brown and Robert Woods. But I do think that if all four are healthy, we're probably not going to see like a 95% snap share from any individual wide receiver from that group, which is a little unfortunate from like a projection standpoint, a ceiling standpoint, but keep that in mind because you might want to hit unders then as a result. And then the last situation to monitor is the Lions backfield. Last week we saw they kind of rotated their running backs by drive. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs have some nice sustained drives, and then David Montgomery ended up playing fewer snaps, but some of that had to do with the fact that he had a 75-yard touchdown, and that one drive was one play long. But even still, I do think that moving forward, what we're looking at here is a split backfield where Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery, maybe Montgomery sees a little bit more work on the ground. Gibbs is going to see the receiving work. I mean, this past week, from a route participation standpoint, Gibbs had a 64% route participation. David Montgomery was at 27%. So it's pretty dramatic there. And then I still think that David Montgomery is probably the goal line guy more so than Gibbs. There was a report, not even a report. It was Gibbs going on Amon-Ra St. Brown's podcast, I believe. And he said that there was that where Gibbs had that drive, they were moving down the field and he did a lot of work to get to the goal line. David Montgomery checked himself out so that Jahmyr Gibbs could go and score a touchdown. So I do think that we're looking at Montgomery still being the goal line guy. I don't think this is like a 50-50 thing at the goal line. So keep that in mind whenever you're looking at like touchdown props and stuff. But overall, I mean, it's a good backfield in general. Like both these guys are going to get theirs, but I do think that, Gibbs is more of the pass catcher, Montgomery, the goal line guy, the bruiser. And that's sort of what we saw last week.
So if it's 60-40 Montgomery for the goal line stuff, if we just assume that, bump it towards his direction, what percentage is it this week against the Bears? Because it's a revenge game.
Yeah,
Dan Campbell, if anyone's going to care about a revenge game, it's that guy. Is it 115% Montgomery, negative 15% Gibbs? How we skewing there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that we're going to see a situation where Montgomery sees 90% of that goal line work. I really think that he's just going to be that guy more. So I would even say more than 60-40 moving. I would maybe say like a 70-30 type situation between the two, even though Gibbs converted. I mean, let's be real. Like Montgomery was stuffed at the goal line last week. Gibbs was the one who was converting. So maybe that changes things, but it does seem like they have their obvious roles. And this is what we projected entering the season, Jim. Like this is what we thought was really going to play out and how it was going to play out, where Gibbs had these really nice target shares, was being used as a receiver, obviously electric with the ball in his hands. But then Montgomery is sort of the grinder, the bruiser. And it wouldn't surprise me in a more potential positive game script this week in Chicago if they just lean on Montgomery a little bit more, because that's the role that he plays in the offense.
And going back to what you said about Dallas, like if it's working, why change it? And like with the Lions backfield, it is working. So no reason to change it. It looked awesome last week. So a tougher matchup this week, but I think that I agree with your assessment of how that backfield should break down. Let's take a look at some yardage props across week 11, JJ. Where are you seeing value right now there?
Yeah, I should have checked this before the show as usual, because I do these the night before usually, but Trey McBride, Jim, his line on FanDuel was 55.5 receiving yards when I locked it in. I think that this is too low of a line. This is actually 3 yards higher at a lot of other books. But Trey McBride has been on absolute. Is it still 51.5 or is it higher?
55.5.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, then it rose a bit since I checked it out. But here's the thing, Jim. I'm still going higher with that number. I still think that it's a number that you can pound the over. McBride has been on fire without Zach Ertz over the last 3 games. He's seen target shares of 39%, 25%, and 29%, which is unheard of at the tight end position. It's literally better than like a Travis Kelce. And the crazy thing is that this isn't like a tendency thing. He's done this with 3 different quarterbacks. Like this isn't just like, oh, this quarterback likes to target their tight end. No, he's done it with 3 separate quarterbacks at this point. So I think it's a scheme thing alongside a talent thing. Now he's hit the over this number still, even if you look at 55.5, he's been way over that number in 2 of his last 3 games. The one game where he wasn't over was against Cleveland. And I think that the line that we're seeing is sort of like an average and aggregate of those 3. But if you look at what Cleveland's done against tight ends this year, they've allowed 80 receiving yards to tight ends all season long outside of Mark Andrews, which is insane. It's 80 total. We're talking like 12 yards per game among those tight ends that we're seeing against Cleveland. So you look at this matchup against Houston, they're first in the NFL in adjusted target share allowed to tight ends. So teams, when facing the Texans, are targeting their tight ends at a higher rate. I think Trey McBride smashes this week. Like, there's a very real chance that he has another amazing game. So I like the over there. Another one that I like, Breece Hall, his receiving line is 27.5 receiving yards. And I like the over on that one as well. He started seeing a higher route participation about 4 games ago. So he's played 4 games in a row now with at least a 40% route participation in each game. And he smashed this over as a result in 3 of those 4 games. Should be a negative game script. And there's no Michael Carter anymore. And I know that might seem like it doesn't matter, but he was kind of, except for last week. Last week we saw a shift in the way they use their running backs in the 2-minute offense. Breece Hall played 73% of their 2-minute snaps last week, but there was a lot lower before that. So what that means is that you're going to feel a lot more comfortable, betting an over like this, because his role is going to be a little bit more secure with Michael Carter no longer there. Buffalo also ranks 3rd in adjusted target share allowed to running backs. So teams are throwing the ball to their running backs a little bit higher, at a higher rate against Buffalo than other teams. And there's a potential for a negative game script here too, where the Jets are going to be forced to throw the ball a bit. So I like that over of 27.5. Is it still 27.5? Am I still good there?
It is. Yep.
Good.
So you are all good with that one. And the 55.5 was minus 114 for Trey McBride. It is also minus 114 for Breece Hall. And I think that honestly, the Michael Carter thing does matter a lot. Like you talked about that, but like, I think people can sometimes undersell the importance of guys who are sucking up a pretty good percentage of the snaps. And Carter was doing exactly that. And Carter didn't get a lot of work, but if you're a Zach Wilson or if you're Nathaniel Hackett, are you more likely to have a dump off to Michael Carter or a dump off to Breece Hall? Hall will likely earn a larger target share in those snaps than what Carter was doing. So even though Carter himself wasn't getting a lot of work, I don't think that should mean don't expect Breece to get a lot of work if he's the guy getting those snaps instead.
Yeah, and look, these lines are efficient, right? Like, we know that these lines are good, and so you need those small edges to really find ways to like even if it's only an extra 4 or 5 yards from a projection standpoint, that could be all the difference in him hitting the over.
Yeah, looking at, I want to see if they have a rushing plus receiving up for Breece as well. That's not up yet, but I think that's also a pretty enticing one, given the injuries Buffalo's defense has had and stuff like that. I think both those are in play for Breece Hall. What about touchdown bets? What you seeing there for Week 11, JJ?
I feel like regression is going to hit me at some point with these anytime touchdown bets, but I got 2 of them for you. The first one's DJ Moore at plus 175. That's over on FanDuel. Justin Fields should be back this week. It sounds like the Lions are a top 5, or the Lions have allowed a top 5 pass rate in all of football this year because, number 1, it's really hard to run on them, but number 2, they're a good team. So teams are trailing against the Lions pretty frequently. Moore hasn't scored since that crazy Thursday night game against Washington where he went absolutely bonkers and had 3 receiving touchdowns. But Detroit, as a pass defense, they're below average in passing EPA per dropback allowed. So I think the combination of some regression maybe coming, favorable regression, Justin Fields being back, I think that plays into DJ Moore being a pretty good bet at plus 175 as an anytime touchdown scorer. And then this next one is over on DraftKings because the juice is a little bit better. But Chris Godwin is plus 300 as an anytime touchdown scorer. I'm going back to Godwin, Jim.
Love it.
Look, if you look at this slate, there aren't many teams that you feel confident are going to score a lot of touchdowns this week, right? And so you can go after like the San Francisco players and such. That's fine. But I just didn't find that their numbers were as intriguing as going with these longer odds at plus 300 with a guy like Godwin. Here's the thing with Godwin. He's currently tied for 4th in the NFL in targets within the opponent's 10-yard line. He has 7 of them. Mike Evans, who's scoring a touchdown seemingly every week, has 4 targets within the 10. So Chris Godwin has almost doubled up Mike Evans in terms of targets in that green zone area. This is likely a pass-heavy script for Tampa Bay. They're playing San Francisco. They're an 11.5-point underdog. So we will likely see a pass-heavier script. And like I said, obviously the team total here is why the number is as low as it is, or as good as it is from an odds perspective. But I do think that Godwin is a prime regression candidate. He's seeing enough work in his offense consistently. He's really just gotten pretty unlucky at scoring touchdowns. And if Tampa Bay maybe scores 2 this week, I do think that odds are in Godwin's favor that he could get one of them.
And I did take the over in this game. I think that it should be a game where we see a decent amount of passing. The Buccaneers are very good against the rush, which could force the 49ers to be a bit more pass heavy than they typically are. And Bucks are probably going to play from behind. I know that San Francisco's defense has not been as stout against the rush recently, but they've still faced a 63% pass rate on early downs so far this year, which is second behind Philadelphia. So part of that's game script, but like game script should also be that way in this game. So
exactly. Right.
Back to old reliable Chris Godwin, 3-1 you can find out there, plus 260 at FanDuel Sportsbook for Chris Godwin. I feel like he's already... he paid off for us on a Thursday night game, wasn't it? It was, so we hadn't even talked about him. Like,
right.
So he's got to come through for us now. Like he owes us, right?
He owes us because we weren't able to do the show for that one. Yeah.
I feel like, so you talked about regression for your touchdown bets with how good they've been this year. I feel like it can't come yet because the universe owes you on Chris Godwin. So next week, the regression. Well, I guess we won't have you next week because it's Thanksgiving, but like week after, maybe. Then we'll get the universe regression. We'll welcome it. We need the Godwin one first, I think.
What's really interesting too, just as an aside, is that whenever I do the touchdown stuff, I'm obviously looking at prime regression candidates. I'm looking at expected touchdowns versus how many touchdowns players had. I'm kind of starting there and then comparing that to the player's odds, right?
Yeah.
And so just from like a process standpoint, and every week I'm like, man, Tony Pollard's number has got to be good. It's got to be at like plus 150, plus 2-1 odds or something like that. And every time, it's like this week against Carolina, which obviously is smash spot. Like hypothetically, Tony Pollard should dominate this week, but it's still like minus 130. Like it's still, but a player like Godwin continues to have these really, really strong, enticing odds. So I'm just going to keep going back to him.
It's lengthened to minus 115 for Pollard.
Oh, little more intriguing.
A little tempting. I'm not doing it, but I need it for. I will benefit because I'll use him in DFS. So if he goes off, I'll benefit that way instead. That is JJ Zachariason. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Late Round QB. Find his work at lateround.com and the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. JJ, thank you once again as always. I will not talk to you next week, so have a fantastic Thanksgiving as well. We'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
You too, Jim. Thanks.
Alrighty, big thank you once again to JJ Zachariason. Again, if you want his thoughts on season-long fantasy, check out the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast and lateround.com as well. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager, only $5 pregame moneyline wager required, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, visit ksgamblinghealth.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, visit mdgamblinghealth.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. That's all we got here for today on the show. Want to give a big thank you once again to JJ Zachariason, our guest for today, for swinging by, breaking down player props. Again, find JJ on Twitter at LateRoundQB. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis. You can follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Don't forget, tomorrow, Primetime Tom swinging by to break down the props for Sunday Night Football between the Vikings and the Broncos. Our Week 11 preview with Ed Feng is up, and our Week 12 college football preview with Ed is up as well. And the Covering the Spread podcast feed, FanDuel TV Plus, and the FanDuel YouTube page. I want to thank you all for tuning in for today and this week. Good luck to you with your bets, and we'll talk to you once again Monday. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.